All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Burns Wilcox, I'd like to welcome you to our cybersecurity and risk discussion today. We have a couple of little housekeeping items that we need to go over as far as how you would submit a question. We're going to ask people to put questions in the question box. The slide right there goes over how to do that, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the presentation. We really want this to be an interactive, more of a discussion rather than a presentation. So please put your questions in there and we'll get to them as best we can. So on the line today, we have comprised a panel of cyber liability insurance and security professionals within the Burns and Wilcox and Kaufman network. My name is Laura McCormick and I'm the professional liability practice group leader for Burns. I have 30+ years experience in professional liability on both the retail and the wholesale side business. We also have Ryan Asenzo on the line here, and he is a senior broker with Burns and Wilcox Brokerage. He has 15 years of experience focused on management liability and cyber liability across all industries and has his RPLU. So thank you for joining us, Ryan. I also have Allison Arnold, who is a broker within Burns Wilcox. She's in Indiana. She's got 10 years of brokerage experience. She's got her RPLU and her CPLP, which is a cyber professional liability practitioner. She was one of the first 10 to get that designation. So good for you, Allison, for being proactive. And we have a special guest with Aaron Buck, who is our Chief Information Security Officer for the Kaufman companies. He's got 20 years of network security and system administration experience. He's a certified information security manager, and we rely on him to keep us all safe here at the Burns and Kaufman companies. So we're looking forward to hearing his perspective on the security control side and how it complements cyber insurance. So thank you all for dialing in and listening, and thank you to the panel for presenting. So next, let's pop on over to our agenda, which is the next slide. But just to give you a quick kind of an idea of what we're going to do today, we're going to go a little bit aside from your traditional webinar where you're talking about the nuts and bolts of insurance and all that type of thing, and really talk more about, have a conversation. What's going on out there? What are the types of claims that we're seeing? How it gets started and how cybersecurity posture can really help prevent claims. So we're going to go over who needs coverage, the top triggers, the Move It IT hack claim, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time. And then we'll have some Q&A. So let's see, who needs coverage? Well, I think we all know that it's the clear answer is basically all organizations need coverage. What we're seeing is 98% of claims come from the SMBs, which are less than $2 billion in revenue. Can you guys on the panel here give us some idea of where you're seeing the claims emanating from? Maybe Allison, you want to get started with education?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see a lot of claims come through on education or municipality type risk. And we see that a lot because to the bad players out there in the cyberspace, those type of risks are kind of low hanging fruit, easy groups to go after and attack because typically they have a lot of records. As you can imagine, schools have your children's records as well. And they may not have a big budget, so they might not be able to implement all the controls that we all know you need in place to protect your system. They may not just have the capability of doing that. They also might not really understand what they need in place. They might not have an IT department who's very sophisticated and understands that this is really a concern in the world right now and that they need to have these controls to protect their network and their data that's on hand. So bad players know this and they are targeting them frequently. I know in my marketplace, we write a lot of small towns because again, they are just that easy target for the bad players, and more our agents are realizing that they really need to help protect their own communities. And so we see those type of risks getting hit a lot. And, we're writing lots of policies for them as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Ryan, I know you handle a fair amount of accountants and law firms. You want to give us an idea of what's happening there?
Absolutely, Laura. Yes. Accounting and law firms should come as no surprise to people on the call. When you think about an accounting firm or law firm, whether it be a small sole proprietorship or a large, global organization, these entities have reams and reams of data in their possession, whether it be from an accounting standpoint, just think about it, employee tax information, employee entity information, social security numbers. From a law firm, just think about if you've done any sort of real estate transactions recently, if you purchased or sold a home, the amount of information you have to provide to your real estate agent to transact that deal. And so where I'm seeing the claims a lot is really on the smaller accounting firms, the smaller law firms, those firms that don't have the robust cybersecurity budgets, or even dedicated cybersecurity CISOs, like we're fortunate to have here at Burns & Wilcox, to safeguard those smaller entities. So really smalling accounting firms, smalling law firms are targets quite frequently for hacks, social engineering scams, phishing scams. And so, it's a real hotbed, especially on that smaller size.
Perfect. Yeah, I feel like healthcare gets tagged a lot as well. What types of things are you seeing there?
Yeah, on the healthcare, it's kind of like almost the opposite story. On healthcare, the larger organizations seem to be the target. Again, if you go to a medical clinic or even to the hospital or to a specialist, again, think about those intake forms you have to fill out if you haven't been there in a while. All the information you have to provide, again, social security numbers, insurance information. And so what we're seeing in the healthcare, and the issue with healthcare is that a lot of these healthcare organizations are owned usually by a parent company, and the parent company has multiple hospital systems or clinics under their umbrella, all on the same network. So when one of these hospitals is attacked, targeted, it's usually a little bit of, I don't want to say systemic risk, but there is a broader impact here because while they're hitting one hospital, they could be hitting 3 or 4. And recently we had a situation like that here in the Northeast where a local hospital system, a regional hospital system was targeted. And once we read on the article, it's like, oh, well, this hospital system is owned by a company out in California, which also owns 4 or 5 other hospital systems, which were also breached as part of that.
Yeah. It is disturbing when you're in the doctor's office and you're giving out your full social security number, which we're always told to not do that. And I have seen where people are, fraudulently getting healthcare insurance under that social security number. So got to be vigilant and watch out for that stuff. Obviously, financial institutions are a big deal because of your own personal financial information is out there at risk. What are we seeing there?
Surprisingly, in financial institutions, these companies, whether they be small, big, or large, usually have enough of a budget for a decent or robust cybersecurity program. So we're not seeing a lot of cyber attacks in the financial institution sector. That's not to say they're not happening. They might be being thwarted, or they're very, very small in their loss. But again, Laura, as you mentioned, financial institutions, no surprise to any of us, bank account information, maybe social security information, a lot of personal information at risk. And clearly, I mean, as a hacking group or a criminal group that's out there, yeah, financial institutions would be a target, but the financial institutions know this. And a lot of regulatory framework behind the financial institution industry, which requires financial institutions to adhere to very, very high levels of cybersecurity, has definitely benefited that industry.
Yeah, it is, and there's so many different steps to that. You look at the financial institution, and they're running retirement plans, right? So then it goes into whoever's retirement plan, and then all that data goes. So I know I've been hit on a couple of those. So
and to talk about financial institutions, yeah, and we've definitely become a very global and active commercial world, so to speak. So I've seen some claims where they're kind of retail driven, but the complexity of the claim, because someone gained access to a retailer and then fraudulently induced a fund transfer fraud from a financial institutions are being targeted and they are being hit with claims the complexity of those claims are just much, much, much more.
Absolutely. And then tech companies, we hear about those all day long in the news. Who'd like to kind of step in and talk about what's going on there? I would imagine, Aaron, you see it on the back end, we see it on the front end. What do we got going?
For sure, I can talk a little bit about that. So, I mean, we see it day in and day out. I mean, there's a lot of intellectual property that's in tech companies, right? And so, hackers are going after the intellectual property for, being able to take and use themselves or release out into the wild, or just holding it for ransom, or extorting out those companies. So that's one of the avenues that's being used. But another avenue that is being used is in like the supply chain sort of attacks. So I think back a year and a half ago when SolarWinds was attacked, and what they did is, the attackers ended up compromising their updates routines and their systems that push the updates out to all of their software implementations across the world. So when the next update routine occurred, their ransomware, their malware was distributed for them across the world. So I mean, it was an incredibly efficient attack by these attackers by leveraging the update routines of technology companies. So it's very easy way to distribute and maximize your attack.
Absolutely. So when we were, the 5 of us were just having a chat before the panel, getting this together, we put the question out there, and it seems like a silly question, who needs coverage? Well, everybody can be a target. And Aaron, I thought, had like the best line. It makes you think. If you want to roll with that.
I mean, it's everybody, right? It's even if you have no data that an attacker would want, your data is important to you. So they will leverage your data against you, right, through ransomware. So really, it doesn't matter what organization, what industry vertical that you're in. If you have data and it's important to you, then it's going to be leveraged against you.
Yep, absolutely. Something to keep in mind for sure. All right, well, the next slide we have up here basically just is going over the top causes of loss for SMBs. It's no surprise you hear about the ransomware claims in the news all the time. So you can look here, but ransomware is the loss leader. Email compromise, hackers, cyber events, and staff mistakes, human error, that it just happened. So at this point in the game, the average ransomware claim is about $400,000, and that can be very detrimental, especially to the smaller size companies. That's a big hit to the bottom line on the budget.
I'll just add on to that real quick. I'll add on to the ransomware piece. It's almost a 1-2 punch with those sorts of attacks, because you've got, an attacker comes in, they deploy ransomware, but before they've done that, they've actually done reconnaissance on your environment. They've pulled data out, they've taken what they've wanted. The last step before they're done is they deploy the ransomware, then they pull out. Well, then they hold you for ransom, right? They wait for you to pay to be able to get your data back, but then they also have your data that they can sell, or they can extort you again and say, listen, now I got your data, pay me again, right? So it's really a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it wasn't enough. I want more, right?
Yep.
All right, thanks for that, Aaron. So I think right now we're going to move on and talk about the top triggers for these type of events. So I've heard a lot that a leading port of entry for these bad actors can be the employees, and I'm assuming you guys have heard that as well. So, Allison, do you want to talk about how people get, are part of the trigger process?
Yeah, so people can be a trigger because, just human error in general. You're moving too quickly through your emails, or, multitasking, you just happen to click the bad link, and then boom, your whole network's down, not just yours, but your entire company's. So really just that human error aspect. And then too, social engineering is a very hot topic right now, and that specifically targets people and our emotions and, kind of our, not necessarily secrets, but things we, have personal in our lives or we use for passwords. They really try to go after those emotions, urgency, try to get you to, take action immediately. And they can't have that type of reaction from a robot. So, people can really cause some damage in those type of aspects. And then also too, a disgruntled employee, they could download some malware onto your system and wreak havoc. So people definitely can cause some cyber events.
Or just steal your data, right? You got a rogue employee that's they're going to go to a competitor and they pull data out of your environment. It may not seem like that is an attack, but it really is, and it is reportable in many states.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I mean, it doesn't even have to be for the company. You see it all the time where people are putting out their fake GoFundMe's or, playing on your heartstrings, so it's you just have to be really careful in this day and age, and it's a shame we have to have our guard up. So controls is another area. Aaron, you want to pop in on that?
Yeah, if I could just make one. Oh, go ahead.
I was mentioning to everybody earlier, I was like, wow, there's like so many things here that I could talk about, but I was trying to really narrow it down to like the most important things. But some of the more obvious things are like missing security controls, like antivirus and malware. It should just be everywhere. You've got to have it out there across your organization. It's the malware, anti-malware software that's out there today is tuned and trained to be able to look for more than just those silly viruses. It's looking for behaviors. So it's really some advanced software that you need to have out there. Email and web filtering. You've heard of the phishing attacks. You've heard of maybe drive-by attacks when you're surfing the internet. All those are very real risks. And so having that being filtered through various controls will just help prevent those from ever getting into your environment. Poor vulnerability management. That's a huge one. Scanning your environment routinely and ensuring that your software, even your hardware that runs in some sort of an operating system has the latest code installed on it, and has the latest patches installed on it, so that the bad actors can't take advantage of it. Incorrect access controls. This is a real easy one to miss. You really should be working off of the three principles of give access when they need to know, give access when there is principle of least privilege, meaning only give access out to the degree of access that they should have and nothing more. And separation of duties. So if I'm an administrator of a system, but I'm also a user, make sure we have two different accounts so they're not leveraged, so I'm not leveraging one account that I use on my daily basis that gets compromised and then can attack a system. Misconfigured and legacy systems. I mean, again, if you're not doing that routine check throughout your environment, ensuring that your systems are up to date, they're supported, they're configured correctly. If you're not checking on these things periodically, the attackers are gonna be able to get a hold of that. Encryption is a huge one. Just knowing that eventually everybody's going to get hacked at some degree, but if you encrypt your data both while it's being transmitted across the internet and various networks, as well as when it's written to disk in your subsystems and your databases, it helps protect you because it makes it that much more difficult for them to be able to take that data out of your environment. I've got, information security awareness training. That's huge, right? I mean, to Allison's point, we've got, people are sort of they say the weakest link, right? But we prefer to talk to it as like, let's secure the human, right? Let's get them to be aware of what to watch out for and how to respond. Because, I mean, click on that phishing link, you're looking at it going, well, is this the right thing or not? Is this legitimate or not? But if you get that awareness training out there, look for those various characteristics and attributes of a malicious email, it just helps them become, that front-facing defender of the organization. And then the last thing is just understanding your third parties, right? And like I said earlier with the SolarWinds breach, if you've got a good understanding of what your third parties are bringing to the table, what software that they're using in their environments, understanding the risks of using those particular third parties, and then just periodically reassessing them for their security, posture and capabilities to ensure that you're working with someone who's smart and takes securities, seriously.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I just spotlights the importance of having a plan, right? To
Absolutely.
mitigate the things that you do know about. There are then going to be systemic risks. And Ryan, do you want to kind of pop in and talk about that stuff?
Yeah. When I think of systemic risks as a trigger for a cyber event, I think of situations that we or an organization has limited to no control over, and it definitely ties into what Aaron was saying about working with your vendors and making sure that they are compliant with the stuff on their security. But again, that's a lot of relying on and a lot of faith in a third party that you really don't have any control over. To tie into Allison's point earlier about people, just this morning I read about a hack at Caesars, and it wasn't a hack. Sorry, it was a social engineering issue that has compromised Caesars network. And what it was a bad actor reached out to a vendor, not a Caesars employee, but a vendor that was working for Caesars, and duped the vendor employee to providing information about Caesars, data. So again, you can train your people ad nauseum, right? But once a bad actor goes to a vendor, to a third party, an entity or person you've got no control over, now you're running into the area of a systemic risk type event. So when I think of systemic events, and Aaron's talked about SolarWinds, which was definitely a systemic event, and then more recently, the MOVEit claim that we're going to talk about, or the MOVEit breach that we're going to talk about, a systemic event. How did this happen? Well, for those of you that aren't familiar, MOVEit is a file transfer software program that a lot of companies use to securely transfer files. The breach of the MOVEit software had been in the works for years by a bad acting company. And from what I understand, Aaron might go talk a little bit about it, a very simple breach of the software. Yep. Once the bad actors were able to access that software, they then had access to all of MOVEit IT's customers. These customers move vast amounts of aggregated data from system to system in order to conduct their business. So one example was if there was a third-party administrator that used MOVEit IT's software, the third-party administrator has tens, 20s, maybe hundreds clients that it works with. Of those clients, there's individuals, thousands, it's a systemic event. And if I'm a company that was using the MOVEit IT software, I've done all the training I've done for my own organization, training employees, hiring a CISO, all the incident response plans, business continuity plans, endpoint detection, MFA, encryption, backing up, everything that Aaron talked about. But if that vendor that I'm relying on, and maybe I check with my vendor, 2, 3, 4 times a year, how are things going? Tell me about security. If you're telling me, oh, everything's fine, everything, it's one of those things. Is it really? You don't know. And in this case, there was a vulnerability in the software. It was exploited, and now, I see here, 600 breaches so far. It's going to be a while to figure out how systemic this was.
Yeah, this breach is really fascinating. This took place early June by a threat group called CLOP. It's typically known for ransomware, and they were able to get their hands on an exploit. It's called a zero-day vulnerability. The reason why it's called a zero-day vulnerability is because nobody knows about it yet. There's 0 days to do anything about it because there's nobody. The vendor hasn't known anything about it. They haven't even had a chance to write a patch for it. The fascinating thing about this is that there's evidence that shows that the CLOP gang had this software as early as 2021, or knew about this vulnerability as early as 2021, where they were testing it. And so then they finally get to the point where they go ahead and they roll this out, and they started off in some of a manual fashion, and then they start to escalate this into an automated fashion. They were able to do this so efficiently that they were able to attack hundreds of companies in an extremely short period of time. So basically what this attack is known as is called an SQL, or a structured query language vulnerability or injection attack. And what essentially a SQL injection attack means is that it leverages the programming language used to access databases and manipulate data to write some queries basically to the database. And so they were able to write this query into the database that allowed them to upload a program into their server that gave them backdoor access into that server. So then they were able to then access that backdoor service. And then now they had access to all the underlying configuration and all of the data, and so that they were able to browse around the environment, understand what data they had, and then pull it out in very large automated sorts of actions. It was really quite impressive, brilliant work. Terrible outcome, obviously, but and as Brian said, there's still more to come. From what I heard, we're up to about $9 billion in costs, up to this point. Like I said, happened at the beginning of June. When you're talking about breaches taking 200 days, for roughly to be aware and understand what the impacts are, there's still a lot to come. There's still a lot more companies that are going to come forward with, telling everybody that they've been breached in some fashion.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen it 600 companies, but that's encompassing 40 million individuals. So that's where the expense comes in. So, Ryan, you could probably give some of your own personal experience on that lovely letter you got in the mail, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is where the value of a cyber insurance, comes into play. So the reason I was so interested in the MOVEit breach was I got notified by a company that I had supplied data to for a project at my house, and they let me know that they had used the software and the software had been compromised, and my data had been part of the compromise, and that they suggested that I sign up for breach notification costs. So they gave to me free of charge access to a third-party company that is now looking over my bank accounts, my credit card, my email address, my sensitive information like driver's license and social security number, and I'm getting updates whether or not any of that information is being used in places where it shouldn't be. So that's why when I got the letter, I was like, oh boy, what happened? And I was like, well, what is this MOVEit IT thing? And the more I read it, I was like, wow, I'm shocked it hasn't gotten more publicity than it has, given the magnitude and potential magnitude it has, because it is a systemic risk. But as I'm getting this letter and I'm signing up for the service, I'm just like, oh, this is cyber insurance policy. This is a cost that some company, whether it be the company I partner with to get the data to, or MOVEit IT's company, I forgot the name. I think it's Progress. Is the company, somebody's cyber insurance might be footing the bill for this, and their premiums are being well spent for with this service being offered to affected individuals like myself.
Or some companies' insurance company may not be doing it because they didn't get a policy, right? And so they're having to do it themselves.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about while preparing for this discussion today. Was Aaron, when he brought to our attention, it was a 0-day vulnerability, so no one knew about it until they exploited it. The company could have all of the controls in place that we're talking about, and because no one knew about this vulnerability, those controls wouldn't have helped them. So then at that point, you really need a cyber policy so they can step in and help you with the expertise, because as we all know, cyber policies include a lot more than just the monies to help remedy things for you in a cyber event. They help with the expertise that comes with it as well. And in a 0-day vulnerability, definitely want to have a policy to help you through navigating that type of breach.
Yeah, so I do think that overall this discussion really pinpoints the importance of active risk management for cyber liability. Vet your software vendors, vet anybody you go under contract with, look at the contractual requirements and what you're getting involved in, because with indemnification going back and forth, you want to make sure that they have all the controls in place if you're taking on that responsibility. So that's an interesting one. I venture to say that the MGM probably got more publicity because people want to make sure that their gambling platforms are working, right?
Well, what I know about the MGM situation is very, very unique. It was, from what I understand, it was conducted by a telephone call, right? So the bad acting company had somehow found information on LinkedIn of an MGM employee and then called the front desk at one of the resorts and purported to be that employee and asked that front desk person either to connect them to somebody else or get them certain amounts of information. So, we talk about breach and hack, and we think about, films and, people hacking away. This was a phone call to the front desk. So just, really, really bizarre, but real situation.
Yeah, it's funny.
One wrong call caused all of this, right?
You see the movies, right? And the movies they really blow it up, and they've got incredibly complex. It's not that. It's a phone call. It's an email. It's really simple stuff. So and most of the time it's not. Even this cloud attack, for example, that's pretty impressive. They actually probably spent a lot of money to gain that hack, and they stand to make a lot of money from this hack. But it doesn't take this. It doesn't take this to have a breach. If you're not following those controls and putting those things in place and really taking care of your environment and securing it, it's really easy to become susceptible to a breach, and very quickly by something very simple.
Yeah. And as you find out personally, it's great that they monitor for you, but having to cancel all your cards and start fresh and get new stuff, it's not fun. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And to Aaron's point about these claims being simple, as we talked about with MGM, simple, but the ability to get more complex. And I don't want to go off on a tangent here. This is probably a webinar for another topic. But when you think about AI, and you think about voice recognition and the ability to do deep fakes with people's faces, we're going to be in a situation in the not too distant future where criminals will use the voice of the person that they're purporting to be, or the face, the visual scanning of the person, or the retina scan of the person they're purporting to be, to gain access to systems.
Yeah, and it is scary because criminals are sophisticated. They're always trying to figure out a new way to, wreak havoc. And sometimes they don't really care about the monies. They just want to disrupt our lives. Like Laura was saying, having to cancel your accounts and get new cards and all that. Sometimes they just like the disruption, and they're always trying to think of new ways to, affect our lives and through cyber breaches. So it's wild time out there.
It is kind of scary that you have to really be vigilant answering the phone these days because they are recording you. They're trying to get you to say yes or no, because that, when you call your bank, are you calling about your checking account? Yes. They want to be able to do those things. So
yes.
Aaron,
be mindful, everybody.
Oh yeah, Aaron, with regards to this Move It IT situation, when a company is working with vendors, software vendors, or warehousing vendors, is there any sort of protocol of how often you should be monitoring your vendors and what kind of checkups you should be doing?
It's really unique to every company, right? It depends on the kind of data and services that they're providing, right? If it's a company that has maybe some not so sensitive data, maybe you do it during onboarding and once a year. But if it's somebody that's like super sensitive data, they're handling cardholder data, or they're handling sensitive PII or sensitive healthcare information, maybe you check up on them a few times a year and go through that audit process. It's really dependent on the risk appetite of the organization. If they really have a very low risk appetite, well, then maybe they're going to have more of those audit experiences for their third parties. But if maybe they have a higher risk appetite, maybe it's less often.
Yeah. And the reason I asked the question, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I was thinking earlier in the webinar where I talked about smaller accounting firms, smaller law firms, seem to be target of a lot of activities. I'm just thinking about, maybe a small to medium-sized law firm that maybe use this software, right? and the email comes down from the vendor saying, hey, we found a vulnerability, here's the patch, but maybe the small to medium sized firm doesn't have a dedicated CISO or someone in IT, and that email just sits there for days or weeks, and they're using the software that's unpatched, and it's scary.
Every company should have some individual that like a security champion, right? If they don't have the budget or the need for somebody like my role, certainly have somebody on staff that says you're in charge of just making sure when these sorts of notices come in, do something about it, right? Don't just on it. So you just got to pinpoint. It's kind of like yelling help in a group of people. If nobody's going to help, right? It's you got to kind of point to that individual and say you're responsible.
Yeah.
Got to have a plan. So, well, thanks for going through all that, you guys. I think that clearly we all know cyber liability plays a very important role as far as liability expenses, first party expenses for when these events happen. But can you guys talk a little bit about the other things that come with a very good, robust cyber liability policy and program, and how it can help avoid some of these things that we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan already kind of touched on it with his personal experience with the MoveIt claim. He got that letter in the mail, and he knows that he got a free service for credit monitoring, probably for a year, I would guess at least. And the policies include that. They include notification costs. Some do it, by individual, some do it by a number limit if you want. But that is really important because, we've all been working in the cyberspace for a while now. You heard our accolades when we started out, and I don't know all the laws for each state for notification. And if you have one client in one state, you have to follow that specific state's laws. It's not universal federally for notification laws. So you have to know every state's laws and regulations around that, and you have to follow that. You have to do it quickly. It's all timed. There's all time frames, 48 hours or 8 hours and all of this. And, policies really help bring that expertise to the table that, a common business owner probably doesn't know. Like I said, we've been in this space a long time. It's tough to keep up with all of this stuff. So, that's a big one. Also, forensic investigators, they'll look into how the bad players got into your system, what they did with your data. Sometimes they'll steal your data and give it back to you how it was. Other times they'll steal your data and make it a big mess where you can't even do anything with it once you get it back. So forensic investigators help figure out those details of what happened, what your data is looking like, how to patch that hole again. Some things like that are really crucial when you're going through these cyber events, because again, time is of the essence, and trying to get your data back or your system back up and running is a very time sensitive, crucial matter, and the expertise with the policy really helps bring you back up as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
And forensic investigators do a great job of preserving that evidence. Because if it's a big enough of an issue and it's reportable, and you're going to have to get monitoring companies, all this sort of involved, there could be lawsuits that follow that. Well, oftentimes that evidence is called into question. So having that evidence to either defend what you did, did you do enough to protect your environment or not? I mean, it can help or hurt you, but you need to have that evidence preserved, and that's a good thing for the digital forensics people to do for us.
Yeah, I know a lot of the cyber packages that are out there, they do the active risk monitoring. So it's not just like you buy the policy and you wait for something to happen. They're going to be doing the dark web scans throughout the policy period and notifying the insured in an effort to avoid these things. So I think that's the true value of the policy. Do you have any other stuff there, Ryan, that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think, the cyber policy is one of those unique coverages that a company could buy that has active risk management. I get emails, a couple times a week for, companies that, their carrier has found a vulnerability somewhere in the network. I give that email to the agent to give to the insured and say, hey, they found this, they should address it. Because they might be asking at the next renewal, was this looked at and corrected?
Yes,
exactly.
So
active risk management, and some of these insurance carriers now have gone a little bit beyond now, right? So if you talk about that small and medium-sized company or even a large company that may not have, endpoint detection or MFA, some of these cyber carriers now say, well, we've partnered with a security firm that if you buy an insurance policy from us, they will come and install the software on your system to improve, your security, but also improve your risk profile for us to take on the risk. So it's definitely an insurance product that you definitely can get a lot of value out of.
Yes.
Yeah, and two, a lot of times, one, they'll follow up on those vulnerabilities. If the insured does not do anything after you've notified them, they will keep following up to say, hey, we just want to, let you know they've not remedied this yet and it's still out there. But two, they'll offer training for your employees, phishing training or, just all kinds of risk management training in the cyberspace. Most of our carriers offer stuff like that for our insureds. And I think that's really valuable too, because again, your normal business owner is not gonna, necessarily know. They might know, oh, we need to do this training, but they don't know where to get it or how to do it. And so reaching out to your cyber carrier is very useful, and they have those tools for you.
And it really, the lights went out. It really depends. Everything's okay here. There are so many different carriers out there, so it depends on the security posture of the company and the size of the company. I know, Ryan, you brought up the carrier that will put the controls in place. That's very attractive to a smaller business. They don't know where to go. They don't necessarily have the budget for it. So this couple of the carriers, they build that into their pricing. So if you buy that policy, they'll go in and they'll start putting that stuff in place. Now, is that going to be needed for a Fortune 500 company? No, it's not. But, there are so many different options out there. And that's why with our agent partners, working with wholesalers and our carrier partners, we do our best to find the right thing for the end user. So I think we're backing up here on time. We've got about 4 minutes. I had a couple of questions come in. Hopefully panelists will be willing to answer this. One I thought that looked really good was, how can organizations effectively secure data and systems in the era of remote work and cloud computing? Aaron, I think that is right up your alley, my friend.
There's a lot there. I think the first thing is like robust authentication. I mean, that's huge, right? I mean, talking about things like, again, strong password policies, strong, leveraging MFA, encrypting your data in all these different cloud environments is huge. Sometimes that's just overlooked, right? Because my data is no longer in my data center. I'm moving it out to these cloud environments. Well, do we have cloud, these cloud environments encrypting my data? Again, access controls, I said earlier, it's sort of the same thing. I've got to make sure that the people that are using this system have the right kind of access and not over provisioned, so that if they get compromised in some way, that system is then, I guess, susceptible to attack by that end user's credentials. Give them too much access, then they can fall victim. Training, is another big thing. Training people on how to be a remote worker, right? It's huge. It's different from being in the office. There, you have kind of taken, an individual outside of the castle, we'll call it, and let them out in their own little world. We got to make sure those same kinds of controls follow them, right? And the same sort of behaviors follow them as well. So yeah, it's true there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to put this up to Allison and Ryan. It's a good question. What common misconceptions or pitfalls should organizations be aware of when selecting cybersecurity insurance policies? That's kind of a loaded question. So
yeah,
what do you see? I mean, I think a lot of that it depends on who's applying for the coverage, right?
Yeah. A lot of times, when working with partner agents that have clients looking for cyber insurance, one of the first misconceptions is that it's a defense-only policy or it's a damages-only policy. And I say, well, that's not how it's structured. Could it end up being certainly a defense or a damages-only policy? Yes, if it's a really, really nasty lawsuit and you have to defend yourself, okay, yeah, maybe you didn't buy enough limit, or it ends up your defense costs erode your entire limit. So certainly there's situations that these could be, but they're not designed to be that way. They're designed to be defense and indemnity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing too is sometimes I see agents who, kind of catch the buzzwords from the news, the ransomware, the social engineering, and then they want those coverages at full limit maybe. And while we can, find that solution sometimes, it's very common for especially social engineering or those e-crime coverages to be sublimited. And carriers do that for a reason. They have to protect their own reinsurance monies to be able to pay all the claims that they have coming through. And so sometimes there's a misconception of that. They know this buzzword, and so they think, oh, we need that at full limit, when it's not always necessary for your insured, depending on the size. And then two, it's not always what the marketplace wants to hand out at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, oh, I have it on my package policy, I don't need a standalone. You need a standalone for what we just have been talking about today. So we're up to our limit on time. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to listen, and a very special thanks to the panelists for taking your time to go through all this with us. We really appreciate it. Think of Burns & Wilcox when you need cyber expertise, because we have it. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.